Let me respond in English. The World Bank's connection and role with Bangladesh. As a country matures and develops, its nature of interaction with the World Bank changes. I have been with the World Bank for 3 years, so relatively short period with the World Bank. The way the world is evolving, Bangladesh has changed, and even the World Bank is changing. In today's world, there are new challenges which the World Bank is trying to take on in new ways. There are areas where, if you study the World Bank closely, you will see that the World Bank has become much more sophisticated and engaged in different ways. Let me give you one example. It is probably for the first time that in the World Bank's goals, we have written down explicitly a concern with inequality. One of the goals is, which earlier in the olden days you would not see that, we explicitly talk that as a country grows, that growth should be shared, prosperity should be shared, and the growth should result in greater equality. One of the great misfortunes of life is a lot of human inequality is inequality that happens at birth. People are born desperately poor. There are people who are born rich. This cannot be corrected overnight, but you want policies which will begin to improve this. Fortunately, the World Bank is now engaged in a whole range of policies whereby we try to reach out in improving income distribution, in the eradication of poverty. As a country matures, one thing I should tell you about Bangladesh is that the engagement with the World Bank begins to change as a country matures. The ideal form of engagement with the World Bank is to engage in a way so that in the long run you don't need the World Bank anymore. In the short run, in the medium term, the loan that comes from the World Bank, you put it to use for better education, better health, but the aim should be that down the road you will not need that. One advantage Bangladesh has, and you must never diminish this, there are countries I go to where there isn't enough intellectual capital in the country. So all the advice, policy advice, has to come from outside. Bangladesh, in those ways, is a very mature country. You have a good education system, so there are people who are able to understand economic policies. So the engagement with the World Bank is much more of a partnership with Bangladesh today than it was earlier, and much more of a partnership today than it is with many other countries. So it is reaching a level of maturity where I think Bangladesh can benefit a lot, and you should engage with the World Bank on your own terms, that these are the things that we want. You place them at our doorstep, and we will also look and see that these are the things we can provide to Bangladesh where we bring our best skills. So it's a new era of engagement with the World Bank, and I do hope that this is something that that Bangladesh will be able to use and do better. I've got a few other questions which are here. How can Bangladesh ensure its energy security? I have some areas of specialization, but there are many areas where I don't have enough specialization. Okay, so let me just briefly tell you on energy self-sufficiency. I don't have enough expertise, so don't take my answer to be the last word on this. Energy self-sufficiency, having enough energy, is for a country vital. You can't have a modern manufacturing sector being run if you don't have enough energy. You can't have modern agriculture being run without enough energy. So energy is crucial, and you have to work towards producing this. Two things to be kept in mind. In today's world, for sectors like the energy sector, there is a lot of inter-country connections that are needed. You may want a part of your electricity to be generated using hydropower plants in Nepal or Bhutan, have that be streamed into Bangladesh, in which case it will come through India. So this is one area, energy, where there is a lot of scope for multi-country connection. And you have to use these multi-country deals, which are always complicated deals because there are different countries with their own interests coming in, but you can do much better by using these multi-country deals. So produce energy for yourself, but also remember that you can do a lot by using different countries' advantage in the neighborhood and interaction with India, where I'm very happy that there has been some dramatic improvements in interaction with India over the last year or year and a half. So use that, use the interaction with Bhutan, Nepal, and try to do better. One final word about energy. Some sources of energy increase pollution. When you're very poor, at times there isn't very much you can do about it because you're worried about today's food. But as soon as you reach a level which Bangladesh has already reached, be very careful as you're stepping up your energy production. Be sure that you're not damaging the climate so much that it will be virtually impossible to reverse that. There are countries which are facing this problem. For Bangladesh, you have to keep in mind that in the energy sector, your progress has to be keeping in mind that you don't want to do long-run damage to the environment. Let me turn to some of the other questions that have been. How can Bangladesh benefit with Chinese currency in the SDR basket? Well, I mean, this is not a Bangladesh-specific matter. The Chinese currency has today reached a level of maturity where, as you can see, questions are coming in with great speed. But I will try to see how many I can handle. So the arrival of the Chinese currency in SDR is really a sign of China's maturity. And as far as the world is concerned, it makes the SDR basket a bit more diversified and bit more stable. But I don't think there is anything specifically from Bangladesh here for Bangladesh to worry about or not to worry about. This is a global change that was expected. Okay. Intra-regional trade in South Asia is around 5% compared to EU, which is 58%, 52% is. What recommendations do you have for greater intra-regional trade? Very important question. And we do want much more intra-regional trade. This is something that India has a big responsibility over here, being the big country, but India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, all these countries, no matter what differences you have, you also have certain common interests to allow the greater movement of goods and services. You want this trade to go up much more, and we will all benefit by this. One or two things that you have to keep in mind, however, when you open up and begin to trade more with other countries. There are dangers on two sides. When you are trading more with another country, of course the other country is trying to make bigger profits. So you can make mistakes where you lose out. But there's another mistake which people make. As soon as they see that another country benefiting from the openness, they assume that they themselves are doing worse. But life is not a zero-sum game. Economics is not a zero-sum game. When you have greater trade and flow of goods, the other country can do better and you can also do better. In fact, no one would enter into a trade deal if you could not all do better. So don't make the mistake of, as soon as you see another person making a benefit, to assume that you're making a loss. It is possible, but it is not necessary. So again, you have to be a bit careful about the terms of this opening up, but South Asia region, embarrassingly, is one of the regions in the world with the least amount of inter-country goods flow, and it is in the interest of Bangladesh, it is in the interest of India, it is in the interest of all countries of the region to step this up. Thank you. Okay, next one. I've got so many sheets, I'm mismanaging them a little bit, but okay. হ্যাঁ, আমি সেগুলো সরাতেই চেষ্টা করছি, করে একটু গুলিয়ে ফেলছি, মিশিয়ে ফেলছি। আচ্ছা, না ঠিক আছে। Why is Bangladesh still behind in terms of entrepreneurship? You know, why it is behind, I don't know enough, but here is one little thing about entrepreneurship to be kept in mind. Bangladesh is going to add a lot of new labor in its labor force. Over the next 10 years, there is going to be a demographic dividend with more young people coming into the labor force. People say immediately, as soon as they see more people coming into the labor force, they say you have to create more jobs. What they forget is some of the youngsters who will come into the labor force, they need not work for someone else. They could be the ones who will create those jobs. They could be the ones who become entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is extremely important in a country. And you will need education. Education must play a role in stepping up on the entrepreneurship, in creating greater entrepreneurship. But education in itself is not enough. You also need a good business ethos and business governance. Here I would give a little bit of advice to the Bangladesh government, to the central bank, to everyone, that you must try to make business processes easier. In fact, on this, over the last 1 year, India has stepped up its effort to improve its business atmosphere. It should take less time for people to get permission to start a business. It should be much faster. A dispute is settled. Dispute settlements should be quicker. So the business ethos in a country should be improved. If that happens, then people will be better equipped to go into business. And education, of course, plays a role. In education, Bangladesh has done well. I know that Bangladesh has done very well in certain areas of research. Research to do with agriculture, with fisheries. These are areas where Bangladesh has done well. But overall, higher education improvement must be stepped up because you have an advantage and you must use that initial advantage to better on that, which can contribute to entrepreneurship. Okay. How can Bangladesh attract more foreign direct investment? 1% of FDI is low. See, there is one reason to do with psychology. East India Company was originally a foreign direct investment which came into the region. Then the foreign direct investment became a conquering force and imposed a colonial rule in the subcontinent for a very long period. So this is in most of our psyche, that foreign direct investment is risky, it leads to control. But you cannot forever be a victim of that memory. A foreign direct investment is risky for a country that has no literacy, that has no understanding. Bangladesh is mature enough. So today, first of all, you have to decide that you do want more foreign direct investment. So the first thing is to recognize that foreign direct investment is worthwhile. You don't have expertise in everything. The world is today complicated, different kinds of goods being produced, different kinds of technologies, different kinds of innovation. A lot of it can come with FDI. So the first step is to realize that yes, FDI mismanaged can do harm, but you can't do without FDI, you need it. Once you realize you need FDI, you have to step up and take measures to encourage that to come in. In terms of your foreign exchange management, you have proceeded in directions where it is actually very, very satisfactory, and I think that makes it more attractive for companies to come in. But where Bangladesh has to work harder is what I've already touched on, business ethos, making it better for businesses to function. If that is felt by companies coming in, then they will do much better. Okay, thank you. Bangladesh has been blessed by demographic dividend. What measures should government take to utilize it fully? I've already touched on this a little bit, but let me just say, yes, government has to do a few things to make it possible for people to be employed. But don't make the mistake of thinking that government can provide jobs to everyone. An economy is too big for the full responsibility to be with the government. The government can create an enabling atmosphere, and then in that enabling atmosphere, businesses will flourish. You have to allow for private businesses to flourish. You also have to allow for state-run businesses which play an important role. It is this combination that will create jobs and make further progress possible. আচ্ছা, আরেকটা দেখি দিচ্ছেন দিন। How can Bangladesh balance the wealth gap between rich and poor people? খুবই কঠিন প্রশ্ন। But this is something that we all have to worry about. শুধু বাংলাদেশের নয়, সারা পৃথিবীতেই the inequality between the rich and the poor is increasing. In the United States, over the last 10 years, per capita income is growing, but the median person's income is actually going down slightly. Inequality is tending to increase. Inequality is increasing in India, inequality is increasing in China. One thing, first of all, you must understand, people very often immediately jump to the conclusion as if someone is deliberately increasing this inequality. That is not the case. Yes, some people are trying to amass. There are people who try to just use all kinds of illegal methods to do better. But there is something international going on over here to do with the economy. We must try to counter it, but let me explain what is going on. With global connectivity through the internet, digital technologies, the world labor market is becoming a common pool. Today it is possible for people to sit in Dhaka, sit in Chittagong, but actually work for a company in Germany or United States or Saudi Arabia or Australia. You can sit here and work for that company. This global labor market becoming a common pool is beginning to indeed create a special challenge that our প্রশ্ন পাঠিয়ে কোনো লাভ নেই, বিকজ আমি নিতে পারবো না, বাট লেট মি টেক দিস। ইয়া, you can send me a few more, আমি চুজ করবো এর মধ্যে থেকে। Now what's happening is, as a consequence, as it becomes a common pool, the less skilled people in Western countries, in rich countries, are coming under competition from the more skilled people in Bangladesh and India. Someone sitting in Bangalore can today work for someone in Los Angeles. Someone sitting in Dhaka can work for some company in Sydney, which means workers in rich countries are coming under competition from the more skilled workers in developing countries. This is having one very strange consequence. Workers in rich countries are seeing their wages are declining because they are being competed out by workers in poor countries. But in workers in poor countries are seeing the more skilled workers are seeing their wages rise. So the skilled end of the Bangladeshi population's income is rising, and the unskilled end of the rich countries' labor force, their wages are dropping. Consequences, inequality is increasing in Bangladesh, inequality is increasing in the United States. Part of it is to do with this global mechanism. Part of it is, no doubt, there are some people, some companies which use all kinds of illegal means to amass their wealth. So it's a combination of two. What should be done? Well, you have to use two different methods. One is taxation does play a role. So you have to tax the rich and divert some of that money from the rich to the poor. Countries must try to raise their tax GDP ratio. You know, rich countries, United States, Scandinavian countries, have much higher tax collection than Bangladesh or India. As a proportion, they collect much more. We have to improve our tax collection in the country, and some of that has to be diverted for the poor. In addition, you have to give people basic health. Bangladesh has done very well, ordinary people. You have to give them basic education so that their human capital begins to develop. As this happens, you will have the bottom segment's income beginning to rise. They do better, and there's going to be some catch-up. Don't imagine a world where there's going to be perfect equality, because that is not possible. Some inequality will remain in the world, but the level of inequality that we have today in the world is too much. This kind of inequality is not a viable system. There are also inter-country inequalities which are very great, for which no single country has an easy solution. So some of this we will have to live with. But if a country does well, if a single country does well, you begin to answer some of that problem. Okay. Whose prescription will Bangladesh take? World Bank is giving a prescription, IMF is giving a prescription, United States is giving a prescription, England is giving a prescription, Britain is giving a prescription, so you get lots of prescriptions. Some countries where their own human capital is not very high, they really have a problem. Whose prescription will you take? For Bangladesh, fortunately, you have a well-educated class. You have a professionally trained cadre. You have to sit down, take a look at the multiplicity of advice and prescription that you're getting, and try to do the best. At times, the choice that you make will be a wrong choice. We are all human beings. We make a choice thinking that we are making the best choice, but the choice backfires. But still, that's the best that you can do. Look at the proliferation of advice and take the best one that you think, in your opinion, is the best kind of advice that you are getting. This is I have my plan, but I have no money. So how can I start my business? I don't know. This is this is probably the hardest question. This is a problem of life. The kinds of things people do is you borrow money to start with, Shibram's story. Don't use up the money wastefully. Invest it and try to build up. But there is also a serious problem. People will not trust you in the beginning and give you money. So, if you're starting from scratch, it is a very difficult start. I mean, there's no getting away from that. There is no one who can immediately solve that problem. But if you get education, make small investments, build yourself up a little bit better, you are taking the first steps to start up something, and from that you grow. With that, of course, there is luck, there is chance, life has all kinds of uncertainties, and that's what you will have to deal with. I wish I could give a more helpful answer, but I don't have the answer to give a more helpful one. Approximate time taken to alleviate poverty in Bangladesh. Well, for Bangladesh, I can't tell you specifically, but I can tell you a little bit about global trends. In 1980, if you take the 6 regions of the world, by 6 regions I'm using World Bank's category, East Asia Pacific, so China and the other East Asian countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, Latin America, Europe, the poorer countries of Europe, go back to 1980, as a proportion of the population, poverty, not in Europe, leave Europe out, but for all the rest, poverty was the highest in East Asia Pacific. 60% of the population used to have an income of less than $1.25 a day, much worse than Bangladesh. So 60% of the population was there. I'll give you rough figures because I'm giving from memory. The next was Sub-Saharan Africa, something like 58%. After that was South Asia, which was 55%, so Bangladesh included. That's roughly the way it's going. If you come today, the sharpest decline in poverty has been East Asia Pacific. From 60%, it is now down to 7%. South Asia also, it's come down a lot. For Bangladesh and for India, in particular these two, poverty has come down quite a bit. So from 58%, I don't know quite exactly what the South Asian figure is now, but it's come down vastly. It's probably somewhere around 22% is the decline. For East Asia Pacific, it came down much more. Latin America, poverty is much less. Latin America started on a lower base, but the decline is not as sharp. So it's much lower at start, but it has stayed on, and in recent times, it has been harder in Latin America, where growth has done very poorly. So the experience of countries can be very, very different, but poverty, as it begins to decline, the last bit can go down very rapidly. So we will keep our fingers crossed that now that in Bangladesh, the train has begun to move, let's hope that it will speed up and poverty is going to drop quite rapidly from here onwards into the future. Well, if Bangladesh has the potential to become the East Asian tigers, then why hasn't it already happened? Well, East Asian tigers themselves, if you go back to 1950, clearly the East Asian tigers had the potential to become East Asian tigers because they became the East Asian tigers. But up to 1950, they had not succeeded. So the fact that you have not succeeded up to now does not mean that you can't get there. So there are no guarantees in the progress of economies. But if you look at, I'll give you one example. Go back to 1950. India and South Korea had roughly the same per capita income. There are documents, American documents, which are saying that, well, to India, we have to give aid to help India grow because India is ready to grow. Whereas with South Korea, the expression that was used in this American document is South Korea is a basket case. It is a poor country that will remain poor for quite some time. So you have to give them some help so that the people survive, but it is a basket case. What happened was totally different. Over the next 30 years, South Korea's per capita income began to grow, and 30 years later, South Korea's per capita income, 40 years later, South Korea's per capita income had become 22 times India's per capita income. It just went rising just sharply, it had grown. It is true that from 1993, India's growth rate now is faster than South Korea, so India is catching up with South Korea. But from 1950 to 1990 was an amazing sprint that South Korea, which was treated as a country that cannot grow, which will do very poorly, transformed itself. Bangladesh is actually today much better off than South Korea was in 1950 because the growth has already started. So I do believe that this is not just imagination, this is not just hopeful thinking. You will need good policies to go with this. You will need ordinary people to put in their energy and the mindset into this. And you know, I'm diverting a little bit from what your question is asking, but I must point to one more thing. In the World Bank, we bring out an annual report called the World Development Report. When I joined the World Bank, the first report that had come out over here, we've got Martin Rama over here, is the person who had he was the director of this World Development Report on labor. It's a very sophisticated report on labor regulations and jobs. And you can see the World Bank's maturity also, that you get this sophisticated report on labor laws, how to do labor regulation. The report after that, where I had joined as the chief economic advisor of the World Bank, and I had felt for a very long time that economic progress does not depend only on economic policies. Just good fiscal policy, good monetary policy can do something, but a part of economic progress is in the human mind, how you think. Are you a dependable person? And I feel even qualities which are ordinary human qualities of goodness, of honesty, of integrity, these are important qualities which actually help a society to grow and do better. So we produced another World Development Report which is called Mind, Society and Behavior. It's a very unusual report because it stresses that economics is not just about the economy. It is about politics, it is about psychology, it is about sociology. Economics is a subject that is embedded in these things. So there are many fronts on which you have to work, but once again I'm coming back to the theme that the train is moving. This is a question which, if I wanted, I would have not answered, because there are lots of questions which I will not be able to answer. This is the difficult questions for me. Do you think that the World Bank is going to lose its hegemony in view of the new BRICS Bank? The World Bank today, I have to tell you, is not what the World Bank used to be a long time ago. If you come to the World Bank, you will see in the corridors lots of Indians, lots of Bangladeshis. So it is actually lots of Uruguayans, people from different countries. It's a very multi-country organization. So it's an organization where today there is representation in different forms from your country, from other countries. So it's not really a hegemonic organization just controlled by 2-3 countries. That's no longer the case. Will it lose some of its space? I don't think so, for the following reason. When the World Bank was established immediately after the Second World War, after the Bretton Woods Convention, the World Bank was... the World Bank, as a part of global finance, was a very, very substantial part of global finance. But the financial world has become so much larger that today the total amount of lending that the World Bank does, though it is more than what the World Bank used to lend in 1946, is a much smaller fraction of the total global lending that is going on. Indeed, the total foreign aid that flows today in the world is 1/3 of the remittance money. Just the money sent by ordinary people is much more than the foreign aid coming in. So the global financial space having become larger, there is scope for many more banks to come in and play a useful role. So the BRICS Bank, which is now being called the New Development Bank, AIIB, I feel these are very welcome players because the global demand has increased, and the World Bank will continue to play a role in this very, very changed scenario. And in the end, if the world becomes such that the World Bank is not needed, then that is a good news for the world, because some of the function that the World Bank was playing, that the need for that has gone down. I don't think that is round the corner, because the global need is still very large. And today, let me just touch on how new challenges crop up. One kind of an area where earlier the World Bank was not involved in, but today we are waking up to, the refugee and migrant crisis. This is not something we played a role. The World Bank played a role. We do a lot of documentation of migration and remittance, but we were not in the heart of this. But you know, from television, you will see what's happening in the world today. One of the biggest tragedies of human beings trying to cross over the Mediterranean, more than 1,000 people have drowned and died. The refugee crisis has become a dreadful humanitarian crisis for the world, and not just in Europe. Europe is capturing a lot of attention, but the Middle East has a bigger problem. We have problem in South Asia. It's a global problem. The World Bank has decided that we want to enter this arena because it is a humanitarian problem, and we are going to lend to countries that may not be so poor, but they've got so many refugees coming in that they need to attend to this. So there are new areas where the World Bank is needed today, and I hope the World Bank will be nimble enough, intelligent enough to reinvent itself and be a powerful force in the world. But if a time comes where there is no need for the World Bank, it's a time to celebrate that there is no need for the World Bank. Is a South Asian common currency ever possible? You are giving me all my favorite questions, so let me drink a little bit of water and I'll tell you. I actually am personally a believer that the world needs more and more common currency areas. The first person who wrote systematically about the need for common currency did that more than 100 years ago. An economist called Stanley Jevons wrote about the need for common currencies. I feel we do need to go that way eventually, where regions and areas will use a common currency. So one kind of uncertainty in life, which is the exchange rate uncertainty, is going to go out. But after what happened in the Eurozone, I think people are cautious. And so common currency areas will not happen very quickly, because Europe, has gone through a very difficult phase. When you do a huge experiment, like 19 countries sharing one common currency, you realize that there can be design flaws. Even Europe, with all its brain power, made many mistakes when it created the Eurozone. One of them is very well illustrated. 1999 is when the euro came into existence. One huge mistake took place in the beginning. From 1999 to 2008, everybody was treating the Eurozone as a common monetary union and a common fiscal union. So you will see the borrowing cost. If Greece is trying to borrow money and if Germany is trying to borrow money, the cost is the same. People considered Greece and Germany identical because it's a common union. If Greece is charging 5%, Germany would be charging 5%. It's the same interest rate for both. This happened up to 2008. Then in 2008, when the Lehman crisis came, a realization dawned on all the players that the European Union is a common currency union, it's not a common fiscal union. So, if you lend money to Greece, the responsibility to pay that money back to you is with Greece, not with the ECB. If you lend money to Germany, the responsibility for the money to be paid back is Germany's. So the European Union is a monetary union, it's not a fiscal union. This immediately created a huge problem, and we've seen that problem is still living with us today. So creating a common currency area, I think is desirable. South Asia is a region where we share a lot in common. We share a culture in common. We share languages in common. It should be possible to go that way. But the design of this is very intricate. Europe, with all its brain power, has made mistake in its design. So we have to wait and see, reach a certain level of maturity. And after that, indeed, this is something that should be thought about. Here's a question where I'll give a short answer. Is it possible for our GDP to grow at 8% per annum by 2020? Short answer is yes. Your savings rate and investment rates are around 30%. Savings rate is above 30%. Investment rate is just below 30%. In the East Asian countries, those days, Singapore, a bit later, Malaysia, Taiwan, in the early days, Hong Kong, all these countries were saving and investing about 35 to 40%. Singapore was saving more than 40%. China was saving more than 40%. But with 35% to 40% savings and investment rate, they were all growing at 8%, 9%. China was growing by 10%. If your savings and investment rate are around 30% now, within a few years, it is possible for you to get this up to 33, 34%. And I think if you get your investment rate up to 33, 34%, you can get into a growth rate of 8%. So 2020 is a bit too far. You should aim to get your growth rate up to 8% by, I would say, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road. You must try to get your growth rate up to 8%, and it is entirely possible. This is a very tough question, and I'm very tempted to give it to the Honorable Governor to answer that, but let me try to give you the best that I can. Can you suggest the optimal level of foreign exchange reserves? I've recently, till very recently, I've had lots of conversations with my counterpart in the IMF. The chief economist of the IMF now is Maury Obstfeld, and before that was Olivier Blanchard. So I've had actually lots of conversations with them, these two people whom I've known as professors, about foreign exchange reserve management. And I feel there is a lot of academic work to be done over here, because what's happening a bit in the world, I think, is a bit unfortunate. If another country holds a lot of reserve, you feel the need to hold higher reserves because the other country can destabilize the exchange rate, and you'll need your foreign exchange reserve to manage that destabilization. So I feel the world as a whole is holding too much foreign exchange reserves. China has $4 trillion, Japan $1 trillion, Russia is very high, India's $350 billion. So countries hold lots of reserves because it's in their individual interest. So if today I'm asked, should Bangladesh hold more reserves? My answer will be yes. As an individual player, you need to step up. You're doing very well, but you need to continue to step this up. I would tell India the same. But if all of them came together and said that should we lower the reserves, I would say that we do need a bit of a pact and an understanding that the whole world holds less of reserves because we are tending to hold too much. So there is over here what, again, since I had referred to game theory, a little bit of what in game theory is called the prisoner's dilemma. Your own interest and the collective interest are a bit at a divergence, but I think this is one area where Bangladesh has done extremely well, and it should continue to move in this direction for some more time. The next question is virtually the same about the utilization of foreign exchange reserves. The utilization is a balance. Some of this money you can use to back up your own infrastructure and development, but you also have to be careful. This is a reserve which will be needed in case there are big fluctuations in exchange rates. Typically, the reserves are used to fight that. So it's a balancing act between using the reserves to help up, or very often you don't even have to help. You have to provide insurance to investment. You tell others to invest and say that I'm standing behind you with my reserves, I can back you, and allow your investment to flourish. But also this is an artillery for handling exchange rate fluctuations. Let me take two more questions and then I'll stop. What would you suggest?
There are hundreds left, but we will not.
I'm going to take away all these questions for my reading later. Will the liberal economic policy address the question of disparity? You know, I find disparity objectionable. That's why this question is very important for me. We want human beings to be much more equal in their living standards. But it is a mistake to think that by keeping the economy closed and everything in the control of the government, you can create greater disparity. What happens is, if you centralize everything, in the end, it's very, very difficult to run a big, complex economy. We've seen this happen in other countries. We saw this happen in Russia, where finally it crumbled. So I wish there was an easier way to get to greater equality, but there isn't an easier way. So you have to use liberal policies to allow trade, allow the flow of capital, allow private entrepreneurship. With that, the government has an important role. The government has to regulate this, set the rules of engagement so that you can do better. Again, let me give a simple illustration. One of the, at first sight, what looks like a perfectly liberal free market is what in America is called a farmer's market. I don't know if you know this, these farmers' markets are markets which in most American towns you have. It'll be on Saturday and Sunday, farmers come and they sell their fresh products. If you go there, these look very nice and you think they are complete free market. Farmers are sitting there, they are selling their goods. Yes, they are making profit, so there is an element of free market there. But I discovered when I was visiting Wisconsin-Madison, this what looked like a free market. I checked up and got hold of the rule book. The rule book is the regulation of this free market, and you discover that there are lots of rules. If you bring your eggs to this market, the eggs must have been produced by this method. You have to sit over here and not over there. Lots of rules. So what you need is a combination of regulation, intelligently designed, and individual enterprise and entrepreneurship. When we get frustrated, when we see that there is a misuse taking place of liberal policies, we do get frustrated. But we have to keep our head on our shoulders and realize that there is no easy solution. To give it all under the control of the government is also leads to another kind of risk, and you don't want that. So it's a combination of the government and liberal market policies that you have to use. That is the way the world is. No one does it deliberately, but that's the way the world is. কি কি বই আচ্ছা গুড আমায় বলে দিলে আরও কিছু স্পেশাল এত পড়ার আছে আমাকে নিয়ে গিয়ে পড়তে হবে তাহলে এটাকেই আমি লাস্ট প্রশ্ন ট্রিট করছি দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন ইজ হোয়াট আর দ্য বুকস দ্যাট হ্যাভ ইনফ্লুয়েন্সড মি ইন ইম্পর্ট্যান্ট ওয়েজ আমার জানেন প্রথম the first set of books which did influence me in a very, very big way are the works of Bertrand Russell. So when I was in my last years in school, I discovered Bertrand Russell, and the openness of mind, the ability to reason, the use of mathematics, almost mathematical reasoning, to me was very attractive, was a huge influence. Another huge influence very early is Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was, of course, as a writer, he was a genius. But it is more than just that. It's his philosophy which influenced me. Rabindranath writes about our common human heritage, that together we share this world, we share this space. This was very early thought. If you think of this, I mean, he's writing in the 1920s, 1930s. So it's a very advanced modern thinking. So Rabindranath is a very big influence. Several of Rabindranath's writings influenced me very, very deeply. Bertrand Russell is a very big influence among philosophers. John Stuart Mill, the bringing rational thought to policy making, is a huge influence for me. I'm trying to think. Kobita, I've always been very interested in poetry, and that is for me, again, growing up in Kolkata must be, it is Nozrul. Nozrul's Kobita was something that we learnt by heart as children. It was part of my growing up. So books of poetry, some of them very prominently, even modern writers I do like, relatively more contemporary writers. Bertrand Russell, Rabindranath Tagore, I suppose these are the big influences for me in terms of writers and philosophies. Philosophy is something that I've had a great interest in, philosophy. I try to keep that up into our present times. Fortunately, my professor, Amartya Sen, who's been one of my biggest influences actually, if you're talking of books, Amartya Das books have influenced me once again because it is in the same mold of rationalist thought that you bring reasoning and human rationality to bear upon the biggest questions of life. So Amartya Sen was also for me a very, very big influence. In fact, when I went to, which was already mentioned in the introduction, my father was a lawyer. So when I was small, I was being groomed to become a lawyer. It was sitting in on the lectures of Amartya Sen in London made me decide that I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm going to become an economist. So that was also a very big influence on me. So that's it. Thank you very much.